Hello and welcome to Focus on Fantasy Romance, episode number 19, a podcast where we discuss books, genre, industry, and our geeky lives. I'm Elle Klaus, your host. I am joined today by A.R. DeClerc.
Hello.
And Paulina Woods, who's waving. And today we're doing book chat. We are discussing Stars Across Time by Ruby Lionsdrake. This is a sci-fi dystopian romance, and Amy has agreed to read the blurb because I am rubbish at it. Amy?
Okay. Can love take root in the cracks of time? Air Force pilot Andromeda Andie Kim dreams of being chosen to join NASA so she can go to space. Instead, she's stolen by savage kidnappers from a dystopian future where fertile women are needed for breeding purposes. One of her kidnappers, a man named Mace, goes out of his way to protect her from the other slavers, but she's not about to trust him. All she wants is to escape and find a way back to her time before she's sold as a broodstock and stuck in this ruined world forever. Colonel Aloysius Mace Theron of the Cascadian Alliance is a battlefield commander, not a spy, but after 20 years of service, he's also trusted by his superiors. That's why when they choose him for a top-secret mission to infiltrate an organization of thieves using a time machine to plunder the past. He's supposed to find and destroy the machine, not fall in love with one of the captives, but Andie is as much of a fighter as he is, and he's drawn to her from the beginning. Yet, if he fights too hard to protect her, his identity will be discovered and his mission will fail, leaving criminals to terrorize the past, perhaps irrevocably changing the history and endangering everyone he knows and loves.
So, I finished this book literally 15 minutes before we started recording our podcast because I got busy and had to change my tires and lost a bunch of reading time. Anyway, I've read a few of Ruby Lionsdrake's books. I've read her fantasy romance, which of course I'm drawing a blank on, and I think a couple of her Mandrake Company ones. Dragon Bond is the fantasy romance. Oh, and Frost Station Alpha. So I'm very familiar with Ruby's work, and I think this is one of her earlier titles. And this is also actually a second pen name for her, so she also writes, I think, traditional science fiction and traditional fantasy under another pen name. So I knew what I was getting into, and overall impression of the book is I really, really liked it. Although at the beginning I had a hard time kind of relating to the characters, and I think that was due to the fact that they were kidnapping women, and the implications of using them as broodstock, I didn't really like that. I mean, the story worked for me, but I just think the subject matter was not my cup of tea, and there's nothing wrong with that. I really liked Andie. It took a little while for me to warm up to Andie, because, I don't know, I didn't start getting really into the romance. I didn't believe the romance was functioning the way that it should until, spoilers, like halfway through when they were actually no longer in the situation of one being the kidnapper and one being the kidnappee. I had a hard time believing that they could be attracted to each other when there was that kind of dynamic going on. But once that was done and they were actually able to flirt and get to know one another, I really liked, well, he goes by Theron in the book, doesn't actually like his name, but I like the dynamic between Theron and Andie because they have a lot of sarcastic banter, and if you really know me very well, you know that I'm really sarcastic, and it's kind of the way that I talk with my husband, and it was just really, really witty. But Amy, did you have that same problem like at the beginning where you're just kind of like, I can't really believe that they would be attracted to one another in this situation? I don't know, I just had a disconnect there.
I'll be 100% honest. I bought this book about a year ago, and I actually started reading it. And then for some reason I did not finish it, and I think it was that reason. I think I was in the beginning stages of the book. I got to, up to what was happening with Andie and Mace, as he went by at that point, and the women, and I really wasn't feeling it, so I kind of put it off to the side. And then we were discussing books to read for the podcast. I happened to see it, and I'm like, oh, I read the blurb again, and I'd actually forgotten that I even started it, and I'm like, let's do this one. So we agreed to do it. As soon as I picked it up and I started going through it again, I'm like, oh, I think I've read this already. And yes, I felt like Andie was a little bit abrasive, and I felt like there was a disconnect. I didn't feel like a romance would have naturally blossomed in this situation where, you know, you could be raped or murdered at any moment. They were treated pretty poorly for, you know, like a hot commodity item, which women were in this future time. You know, like the population's so low and they need women, you know, healthy women and childbearing women, and yet they basically treated them kind of crappy for somebody that they needed so badly. And I wondered very early on, I'm like, okay, so one of these guys is obviously not the bad guy. When he started protecting them, you kind of figure out who it is. But yeah, I felt like I would not have believed it if this was like a genuine scenario. Well, then, so when we get to the point where, spoilers, they're separated and he's gone on to back to his fort or wherever, and she's trying to make her way to find him. She's been separated from the other women. At that point, the book started to pick up momentum for me. And I'm like, oh, she's going to see him again. And she did have a very reluctant attraction to him. She's like, no, I'm going back to my time. Why do I like this guy? You know, I don't understand. He's, you know, but she kept saying he's out of my league. And I'm like, he's basically a barbarian kidnapper / spy. Like, how can he be out of your league, you know? But she had all these kind of like down on herself thoughts about this guy not liking her back, and oh, that's just silly for me to like him. And that kind of bugged me a little bit about her too, because on the other hand, she's an extremely capable, extremely strong woman who's done a lot of things. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. She's done a lot of things to make it in a quote unquote man's world. And they made that very clear at the beginning of the book when they're talking about all of her accomplishments and her dreams and what she wants to do. But at the same time, she has these really like down on herself thoughts about he's not, you know, oh, this guy's, you know, out of my league. We can't be together. I don't, you know. And then as things roll along, they do have a very nice banter with one another. They do have a very natural relationship. It kind of falls into rhythm with each other, which I like, because kind of like that's how you are with people that, you know, you kind of belong with, because it's not a struggle. You don't have to try really hard to, you know, be you can be yourself around that person. So I liked that. And I thought she did a really good job with the male point of view. In the very few parts of the book where it's from Theron's point of view, she did a really good job, because she made him kind of nervous and she made him a little bit worried, because, you know, Andie does come across as so strong-willed and so different than a lot of the women that he knows in this time. And so it's just, sorry, kids over here, trying to show me stuff. But I felt like they had a really natural kind of romance that progressed from that point on, and I was pretty happy with it. I was dissatisfied with the ending. I thought it was trite and overdone, and it had no surprise for me, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I like surprises. I didn't feel like it was a twist. I felt like she thought it might be a twist, but it wasn't a twist, because you just knew it was going to happen.
Well, to be fair, she couldn't call it a romance if they didn't end up together somehow.
I wanted them to end up together. However, I wanted them to end up in a more ingenious way than... Spoilers, what happened? He showed up on her doorstep in the past, blah, blah, blah. I wanted it to be a bit more creative than that. She did, she built a good base, solid base for the reader to expect that to happen, though, because, you know, he says, I want you to stay with me, and his general says, absolutely not. We can't keep her here. It might affect, you know, if we change the past, it changes the present, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, so if they're going to be together, he's going to have to go back to the past. but I was kind of hoping for a bit more of a bang, because he showed up on her doorstep. She says, "Oh, there you are. Where you been?" They go inside and not boots. So literally, like, it was a little bit of a letdown for me, because you had this kind of like rushing up, you know, high octane kidnap. Then you had a little bit of a nice plateau where they got to know each other and they had their little relationship. And then you had some more high octane energy adventure stuff. And then, you know, she had a really good sex scene, I thought, on the roof of his house, in the fort. I thought that was pretty good. She did a pretty good job. It was a little, you know, it wasn't cookie cutter. And then I just felt let down at the end because I wasn't surprised. I wanted to be surprised. I don't know. And I kind of felt like they gave it away when they said she was going to have a son. Because I'm like...
Well, they also never mentioned who the father of her son was.
I kind of thought it was obvious, but then again, maybe it's just because you hope that he's the father of the son. I thought maybe she was going to get back to her time and find out she was pregnant.
There was a point where they mentioned she has an IUD.
Yeah.
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 Which I actually had a problem with that, because at least where I live, it's hard to get an IUD if you haven't already had children. They don't like to do that for women who haven't had babies yet because it's harder to put in, but whatever. That's just me.
Yeah, there was a couple of things that kind of irritated me. I'll be honest with you. I felt like there was a lack of, and this is a huge problem for me when I write, so I can't say anything about it, but I am in the opposite direction, though. There's a huge lack of interesting secondary characters in the book, to my opinion. I mean, it focuses a whole lot on Mace, or on Theron and Andie, which is good. They're the main characters. They're supposed to be focused on, yes. But everybody else is kind of glanced over. Even the villains aren't really that villainous. I mean...
Yeah, there was a little more development with Minji. I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. But I don't, because the author limits herself to the perspective of just the male and female main character. I don't see how they could have developed side characters more without pandering. But I will say I do like that the author, at least in every book that I've read, she doesn't just throw in female characters to be competition or catty or...
Right. There really was no, like, love triangle. It was, this is the guy I'm interested in, this is the chick I'm interested in, headlong toward each other with, you know, the only problem with the relationship were outside forces, not necessarily trying to pull them apart, but, you know, just circumstances with the fact that she belonged in the past and he belonged in what was her future, their present. You know, there wasn't really a whole lot of, I don't know. Okay, so, like, I liked Minji. I thought she was good. I even liked the dorky little lieutenant guy that follows Theron around, who's the camp historian, the fort historian guy, Gideon. Yeah, I liked him too. I would have liked to see a little more interaction, maybe between, like, well, I know, like, Andie and Minji were, like, split up for 2/3 of the book, so there wasn't a whole lot of interaction to be had. But even between, like, Gideon and Theron, and that's asking a lot, because for what the book was, I thought she did a really good job streamlining the plot so that she didn't go off on all those kind of tangents. You know what I mean? Yeah. She kept me kind of on a straight path, which I liked. But I also felt a little bit lonely. I felt like they were a little bit isolated as characters. But like I said, that's a problem for me, because I like to turn every freaking secondary character into a main character and try to give them all, you know, like this kick-ass story that may or may not be needed. And that's
to be fair, from the side characters' point of view, they are the main characters, so I can totally understand doing that. But every Ruby Lionsdrake book that I've read has been very sequential and limited to the hero and heroine's point of view. And everyone I've read has been the couple is thrown into a very like high stress, almost traumatic situation, and they grow together due to the craziness going on. But yeah, there's not a lot of internal struggle like that I was able to detect. Like you said that Andie had like a moment of insecurity when she saw Theron with, you know, clean shaven and cut, and you know, and I really liked that interaction. I liked her reaction to seeing him for the first time, that he was, you know, cleaned up and super
Clean
cute.
shaven and in his like uniform, and you're like, oh, a man in uniform, okay.
Right. But then the insecurity was there for 5 seconds and it was gone, and
Right.
Andie was back to being her badass soldier self, and that's fine if that's her character. But like, if she is a badass soldier who has self-doubt, it kind of needs to play through the whole character arc.
It is her struggles are her conflicts are very external. You're right about that. Her character, well, and it is possible that I have read other books by her. My thought is that I have some on my to be read that I have not gotten to yet, so this might be the first one, because I have a giant pile of books that I just keep collecting. And then
if you have Frost Station Alpha, I think she wrote it as a serial, and then you can buy the whole thing in one lump. But I really like that one. That one got me more in the feels than this one did. If you know what I mean.
Missing, though. You're right, though. I really missed that like epic feel moment where I'm one of those. I'm so bad because if I don't cry, to me, or laugh out loud, to me, it has not touched me. It either didn't touch my phony bone or it didn't hit me, and you know. So I didn't feel like there was those epic feel moments where like, oh my god, I need a tissue. There's a couple of authors that like, I can't even go back and ever read that book again because it literally like, you know, tore me up. But ugly cry, like bad. But this was, I mean, it was good. It was cute. I felt it was a little bit heartwarming. But I think that was what it was missing. I really do. I think it was missing that like that hits you in the gut kind of touchy-feely moment that, you know, you get sometimes, and not all, and a lot of times too, if you have SF, if you have science fiction, a lot of times, and this is science fiction dystopian kind of mix, but a lot of times when you have adventure romance too, because I love adventure romance, that's my jam, but when you have that, sometimes the adventure can get in the way of those epic feel moments because, you know, you've got those plot lines you have to catch, and you've got those bad guys you've got to kick ass, and you've got all those things that you have to do along the way. You kind of lose those epic feels that you can put in there. So I know that SF is harder sometimes to inject those into. So, but overall, I think generally I enjoyed the book. I haven't finished a book in probably since last book chat, probably, because I start them, they don't catch me, I put it away, I say I'll finish that later, and I don't go back to it. Sorry, authors. I bought it, so you get your royalties. I don't know. Hopefully I'll finish it. Hopefully I'll review it for you, but sometimes, I mean, like, it's got to hook me. This one, even though it was kind of almost like a half reread, it did keep me going till the end. So I was interested to find out what happened. I did want to see them get back together, and I wanted to know how. So that I have to say is a big plus.
The author does a podcast under her sci-fi fantasy name, and she's mentioned the book and how she's stuck in the time travel romance genre, but apparently people aren't interested in people jumping forward in time to a dystopian future. They want more jumping back to a medieval setting, or Vikings, or Highlanders specifically, because there's a huge genre trope of women gets kicked back in time to, and I think that's funny. Yeah, Outlander is the big one, but we've done a book chat about Jesse Gage's Wishing for a Highlander, and that was really good.
Yep, and it's one of, like, there's probably literally thousands of Highlander.
Oh yeah,
time travel.
But she was saying that, like, if you notice at the end, she left it wide open for later books. There could be later books. There could be other romances between other couples. You know, the foundations are there, but I don't think that she's ever going to write another one because people are looking for Highlander romances whenever they're talking about time travel romance. I'm like, yeah, I've never read a romance that was a time travel one where people got kicked forward. It's always been back in time. What is that noise?
Can I say something here?
Oh,
yes.
That might be me. Sorry. Hold on. My daughter's playing Disney Infinity, and it's making this ding ding sound. So hold on.
Yeah. What's going on, Paulina?
Kind of on the point that you guys are talking about the. By the way, no, I did not read the book. I am fighting a migraine. That's why I'm in the dark. But what's it called? When you're talking about like going forward and backwards, I think the reason that a lot of women, when they read romance books and it's time travel and you're going forward in time, backward in time, they kind of they look at that time as like, this is when men knew how to treat women. You know, they're big strapping guys. They work in the field. Whereas now half the guys get manicure pedicures with us and get their eyebrows done. And maybe their look is, in the future, are men going to go back to being manly like that, or are they going to get even more, for lack of a better term, sissy? So maybe that's the problem with writing books that jump forward in time, is that we can't see the men developing into alpha males again as they were in the past. Alpha male is no longer a man who can provide for his family out there fighting and a kilt or whatever else he's in with his biggest sword. Instead, he's a guy that goes to work 9 to 5 and pushes paper, and it's not as thrilling. Like, honestly, if they did like a woman from the 1800s or 1900s and she was pushed forward, can you imagine what the first thing she would say about our men? She'd be like, send me home. You know? Maybe it's just the fact that...
I don't know. Maybe she'd like the right to vote, own property, not lose custody of her children during a divorce.
Well, yeah.
You just offended like 100,000 metrosexuals. Like with...
Hold on, I'm talking about the men. I'm talking about the fact that she'll want to go back to the fact that her man was a man. I'm not talking about like the free to vote and all that stuff. Yeah, they're like that part. But in the end, most women, when they get into relationships, they don't want a guy who's more girly than they are. And we don't see our men developing into more manly men. The women are now stepping up and developing more manly personalities, if you can say that. The only way to explain that, like where we can do it ourselves. So I think when we read, we want a man.
There's a whole genre out there, though.
What's that?
For the beta male romance, which, he's not, and that's what, like, for our short story anthology, my main character is not your typical alpha male. He's quintessentially the nice guy. And that whole thing about nice guys finish last and all of that stuff, everybody's always like, a woman wants an alpha male. Sure she does, until she has him, until she has to put up with his ass, and then she don't want him no more. But that is where it becomes different. So there's this whole thing about, like, your alpha male's protective, and always everybody goes on what their good qualities are. But then there's also this other side to having an alpha male that, for especially a lot of women who live in the present day, they're going to grate against that really hard, against that overprotective, overbearing, I tell you when to breathe, I tell you how to wear your hair kind of thing that comes along with it.
We're not even dating out beta males, though. If you think about it, in this day and age, I think we're dating like just the normal male. Because even their beta males were more manly than some of the guys that you run across today.
I think it depends on your definition of manly.
Right. I think that there is a male toxicity that perpetuates a lot of violence towards females and males that don't add up or meet up to this hyper masculine ideal, which is unrealistic. It's like telling a woman who may not be as feminine as you think. Well, you need to be more girly. I'm like, well, no, I can be however the fuck I want to be. Sorry. And it's my right to exist the way that I want to exist. So I'm going to have to agree to disagree. I hate alpha holes, like as a character trope and as in real life. Like, I couldn't stand them when I was dating, and I just wanted a guy that would treat me with respect and understand that I'm going to be the way that I'm going to be. I'm going to belch and wear nail polish, and I'm going to be an oxymoron of things that are masculine and feminine, and that's just the way that I am.
But Amy, I'm dating an alpha male, and he doesn't stifle me in any way. Like, he literally is. And, like, if you met my boyfriend, you'd be like, holy.
Yes, but your boyfriend might be an alpha male, but your boyfriend was born in the 20th century. He's never lived in a time when, you know what I mean, women had no rights. He has grown up and has developed in his time where that has always been possible. But if you go back in time where a woman is nothing but property, and, you know, that's a whole different mindset for an alpha male of that time period versus an alpha male of this time period. It's complete. And there's good and bad of both kinds.
Let's go back to the topic we were talking about then. Okay, so in futuristic, and the reason she doesn't, you know, she probably won't write forward because nobody wants to read it. It comes back to the fact that again, the reason people don't want to read forward is they don't see the male as developing into who they say. Like, people rather read Cyborg, which is you know, the cyborg men still are almost a throwback to the past, whereas a male who, what is it called, kind of develops, like, you know, generations past, they're not going to be the ideal man that most women think they look for, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm going to say, though,
it's just
I have read, okay, so if you ever read anything by Kit Roca, and I don't know if you have, but her books are very good. They're more along the lines of like a dystopian biker romance, sort of.
Really?
Like, basically, that's what I call dystopian biker erotica. Probably that's
okay. I'm sorry. Bikers are going to be dirty and disgusting in that.
No, that's different though. This is different. It's a far future, post-apocalypse. You have the haves who live in the beautiful, bright, shining city, and you have the have-nots who live on the outside of the city in what used to be the suburbs, what you would call the burbs, but is now run by all these different gangs. And first book that I ever read, girl from the have side of town ends up finding her way through a whole bunch of mischief into the have-not side of town, and she's being messed with by these people, these other guys, and the one biker guys comes in, swoops in, saves her. Typical alpha male kind of thing. But the thing I was going to say about it is it's futuristic, but it gives you a very good view of why they are forced to be more alpha male in that time period, because there's no law, there's no government, and so these gangs protect the poor people of their little, their sections that they do. They protect their people. And yeah, you have some bad gangs, and then, you have some better. They're not, none of them are actually good. They all deal drugs and, sell sex and drugs and rock and roll and all that stuff. But some are better than others. But it actually gives you a pretty good, she does really well at describing the way it built up from how men now are real metrosexual, because in the city, in the haves city, the men are all much more refined. And then, when you go out to the outlying areas, the men are much more rugged, and they have to be. And she does a really good juxtaposition between the two, because girl's supposed to marry guy from the city, is in love with guy from the outside, and she really shows you how like they evolved over time into, you know, these two completely separate styles of guy. And so the minute that you said that, it made it, my brain clicked over to those books because it's a whole series of them, and they have some, they're really, really juicy. So it's, I mean, it's probably like, I'd say it's maybe R-rated, maybe a little bit further, maybe closer to X, but I mean, there's some kinky stuff that goes on. I enjoyed the story.
No, I think I read one of those books. I'm just thinking I probably have.
Yeah, but and I was like, oh, you know, I'm not a thing for biker romance, but it was futuristic, so I was like, I'll give it a shot. And it was, I think it was free, the first book in the series that I picked up, and I actually enjoyed it a lot. So I was like, because she did a really good job of defining like the difference between, and both of them were considered alpha males in their society. One because of his power and privilege, the other because of his actual physical prowess. So it was like two totally different scenarios of what makes up an alpha male. So I was, and she basically at the end, you know, she's got to choose between, do I keep my money, my wealth, my, you know, beautiful clothes, my gorgeous house, or do I go live with this guy, but I'm happy. So it was really good. I actually read, I think I read it all the way up till she did a spin-off of the series, and I haven't read any of those. So it was interesting because each one of the bikers, you know, gets his love, and it comes from different places. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was very interesting. So future romance can be manly. I'm like you said though, I don't know what it is that makes people afraid of science fiction. The minute you start mentioning science fiction, a lot of romance readers are like, oh, no. Too much science for me, yo. I'm out.
Yep. That's probably exactly what it is. There's too much science, or science. It's the genre, or excuse me, the gender preconception that women are bad with science, so women don't want to read science fiction. Thus, they don't want to go to read science fiction romance, which is totally bullshit. I love science fiction romance. I read a lot. I've been reading a lot of it actually lately, but that might be it, or they're just worried that it's going to get too technical, like hard sci-fi, which is a genre within sci-fi, is hard sci-fi, where it is actually very based in science, right? And you know, a lot of science fiction romances that I've read, they have the science in it that makes sense to me, but I'm not going to go fact check them.
and you have, you know, sometimes you'll get a sci-fi reader who picks up a sci-fi romance, and then, you know, you're getting an email about how your ship wasn't going enough parsecs per second to get that far in the galaxy at that time, and you're like, okay, so, you know, but you know that's because you have people who are more interested in the science. Some people are science-based. Some people are more interested in the feels part. And then, you know, you have people like me who I enjoy the science and I enjoy the feels too. So I want both in my story. So, you know, you're never going to be able to please every single reader every time. The best thing you can do is try to just walk the middle road. When you're doing something like sci-fi romance, you just try to stay in your little path.
Whatever, I go all over the place.
I don't color inside the lines either, but
yeah,
you know, I don't have enough readers to worry about it right now. I guess later on, if more people read me, then it might be a problem. But for right now, it's fine.
Well, the great thing about science is it can change. There's a lot of things that are just theories that have been, there's things that are being disproven and proven every day. So what was hard sci-fi 10 years ago, now we know isn't true. So even then, even with, you get these hardcore sci-fi people that are like, oh, well, it's XYZ because X theory and blah, blah, science. Blah, blah. Well, no, 10 years, we'll figure out it's something else.
Right. You know, just like when you write a book about parallel universes and, you know, 10 years ago, somebody would have told you that's not possible. Now they're going to tell you, oh, yeah, bubble universe theory, multiverse theory. You know, those things are, you know, actual, you know, science that's being studied by actual scientists in labs. So, you know, things like that are, and a lot of times, you know, I wonder how many scientists read something in a sci-fi book and go, whoa, I wonder if that's possible. Let me go check that out.
There's actually people trying to invent like tricorders and medical devices seen in Star Trek. Someone's trying to make a lightsaber that actually functions as a lightsaber does in Star Wars.
Cloaking
so yeah,
devices. For
So there's a lot
ships
of sci-fi that is affecting the where science is going. So yeah, totally. And I like how get back to the book we were trying to review. I like how the author did set the dystopian world in kind of in the same path as we are actually going. I don't know about the birth defects, but she talked about heavy metals causing the birth rates to lower, environmental problems, running out of gas. Yeah, so we could totally end up there in a few centuries or less, depending on
how
reasons.
things go.
Yeah, I don't want to get into politics, but yeah, I basically said everything I wanted to say. I do recommend any of Ruby's books if you don't want a time traveling dystopian romance. Like I said, Alpha Frost Station, or whichever one had Alpha Frost Station in the title. I recommend that one. I like Dragon Bond, which is the fantasy romance one. Did you have anything to add?
No, I enjoyed the book. I like her style. I think she writes really crisp, and she writes things really clear. She doesn't go off on a lot of tangents and describe, like 5 different paragraphs about the way the dirt looks or anything like that. So I really enjoyed that. I thought the plot was really good. It was a good, fast-moving plot. It kept me interested. So yeah, so I mean, I'd read more of her stuff, and I don't have anything particularly terrible to say about it. I had wished for a bigger bang at the end, maybe.
Well, that was probably had in the bedroom where it was off the page.
Yep, the big bang took place off camera. So.
Okay, so I will have links to everything that we mentioned in the podcast down below. Next week, we are doing an interview with Kim from Paranormally Yours, and she is a book blogger, so we will speak to her and see how things work for the book bloggers. Thank you for joining us. If you liked the podcast, please comment, like, and share. This has been episode 19. Good night.
Good night.